And we are now live and we are now broadcasting. So we'll watch the numbers start to fill up in the participants box. See where we get to. Yep, it's filling up pretty quickly. Like I say, it's like opening the doors at the seminars in the UK and the US and just watching people coming in. It's pretty cool.
Except everybody gets the same seat here.
That's right, yeah. Well, I don't, you know, which is better, going to a seminar or kind of getting this in your own living room? Yeah, I think there's arguments for
Well,
both.
I don't think it's the same thing. It's not the same animal.
It's definitely the same energy. I totally agree.
It's apples and oranges, you know.
Yeah. Okay. So we're getting a few messages coming in. Hey, Vaktang, how you doing? Jen, how are you? This is just some of the.
Oh, that's what people are saying to me.
Yeah, well, they're just putting messages into the chat room.
Okay.
So just saying hi, hi, hi. Letty, how you doing? Leaf, how are you? Hey, Dave, how are you? June, VJ, good to see you. Mike, good to see you too. Sarah, hi. Hey, Christine. Well, they're starting to flash by now because everybody's putting messages in. So, hey, guys, great to have you on board. Thank you for joining. Yeah, there's quite a few. So we're up to 47, 48 participants. Hey, Tina. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Duncan. Can you see these, Richard?
No.
No. Okay. Well, there's a few people putting in what they're drinking right now. So there's a few beers on the go, a few gins on the go. Hey, Steve. Okay, so we'll give it another minute or two, and then we can start. Hey, Tanya, how you doing? Tanya's just having a cup of tea.
That sounds terribly English.
Well, that's what we do, Richard. Tea and sympathy for everything. Christine saying she loves your tie. Sarah Carter saying she loves your tie.
Me too.
Yeah. Yep. Hey, Jill. A few people want to know what you're drinking, Richard. Now, I know what the answer to that is, but I think I'll let you tell them.
Fuji water.
So a couple of people saying hi to you, Richard. So Jill's saying hi. Oh, yeah, a couple of people saying don't forget cake. Hey, Lizzie, how you doing? Okay, I'll give about another minute and then I think we'll start. So there's obviously one or two people still trying to get in, which is good. There you go. Okay. All right, I think that's it for now. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's great to see you all virtually, as it were. And of course, it is an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Richard Bandler with us, the co-creator of NLP. And I think most of you know that I was lucky enough to be mentored by Richard a couple of years ago, which was just an amazing experience. All we did during the mentorship was we focused on the business of NLP and NLP in business, which is kind of where I really want to apply all my NLP skills. And I thought I was good going into the mentorship, but Richard just took me to another level in terms of my skills, in terms of my business knowledge as an entrepreneur. So it's been absolutely amazing. And since then, you know, my business, my skills have just gone from strength to strength. And obviously getting to work with Richard and getting to work with John and Kathleen in the US and the UK just keep sharpening those skills as well. So it's been absolutely brilliant for me the last couple of years with everything that we've done together. So Richard, welcome.
It's nice to be here, Tom, and it's nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. You know, albeit over the interweb. It'd be great if obviously we were out in the US, so that'd be fantastic. That'd be really cool. But yeah, so that obviously the whole focus of the kind of the webinars that we've done with myself and with John and obviously with you is really about NLP and business and the business of NLP, because that's kind of where I see its applications and have done since I was first introduced to NLP about 12 years ago. So I think you've seen some of the questions. So if it's okay with you, I'll just start firing away and we'll see where we get to. So there was a consistent theme around this particular question. Is there a particular technique from NLP that you find most effective in business? If so, what is it? And can you give an example of where you've used it?
Well, that's a really big question when you say, is there a particular technique? To me, there's always a double-edged sword. One is, how do you improve what goes on inside of you so you make better decisions and you become more determined and relentless? And then the other side is what you use with people on the outside, and things like your ability to detect strategies and what motivates people, and in particular, how to get people to be persuaded or convinced. Because those of us who are in business, in essence, are always selling our services or our products. And we do that in our advertisements, in our letters, in our web pages, everywhere. So our mastery of linguistic patterns is incredibly important. And your mastery of yourself is incredibly important. That it's not just that you rehearse a bunch of patterns, it's that you become relentless in the application of them. And I think a lot of people learn NLP and they don't take the time to shift themselves enough that their purpose is well defined. That to me, your ability to, so to speak, give up the past failures. It's not that you don't know about them, it's that you don't think about them. The best thing about the past is that it's over, so that when you really redefine your purpose in the future, who you're going to be and how you're going to get stuff done, and clearly make a plan and adjust that plan as it stops working, so that you're constantly redefining both yourself and how you feel and how you perceive the world, so that you become very generative. The process of being in business is like being alive. A business has a life of its own, and it's either thriving or it's not. And when it's not thriving, it's because you're not doing the right things and you're not doing them soon enough.
I totally agree. I mean, I think when I first learned NLP back in 2008, when I did my first practitioner course, because I do so much work with salespeople, for me, the meta model and the Milton model were just incredible, because I could see straight away how I could use those to listen to my customers more effectively, and then challenge them more effectively, with exquisite use of language, shall we say. So that for me was like kind of the real light bulb moments, and I could see
the meta model itself. Right now, I'm rewriting The Structure of Magic.
Wow.
And instead of it being a book about language and therapy, it's a book about problem solving. The meta model is one of the most profound problem solving tools you can have. And in business, that's what we're doing. We're constantly solving problems, and not just fixing things that are wrong, but creating problems that don't exist by making goals and then finding out how you problem solve your way to succeed at those goals. Mm-hmm. That, when you want to expand your business into a different climate, many people looked at this virus thing as if all it could do would be to cut down their business, when it really also gave people the ability to start doing things online. Restaurants had to find out how to deliver food and how to get it picked up at the curb, and so that a small restaurant actually could become a bigger restaurant than it had numbers of seats, if they potentially did correct customer acquisition, if they serviced the needs of the people. Here in Dallas, I heard a story this morning on the news of a kid that was delivering newspapers. And instead of just throwing them on the door, he left a note in the newspaper: if you can't go out and get your own groceries, I'll get them for you. And he put a phone number down. People called him. He made arrangements with the store for people to call in the list of things, and literally in neighborhood stores, so he could go in and get all these groceries for people that were literally afraid to go out because they were in the category of having an immune system that wasn't working well, or they were in their 80s or whatever it was. And he would bring their groceries and place them safely inside their door. So instead of delivering, $2 newspapers, he was now delivering all groceries, getting a kickback from the store. So it didn't even cost the people anything. The store, cut him in for a piece of the action. And, the environment of business is where you look at what you're doing and you start going, I could make the same trip and make more money. I can do the same thing. And when you expand your business, as the whole nonsense about the virus disappears, you should end up with a bigger business than you had, because all your old business should come back. Tremendous pent-up energy. I think that's why we're getting people demonstrating about just about everything in the United States. And Trump put on his first campaign thing, and over 1 million people wanted to go to it when it would only hold 20,000 people. And I think people are just looking for an excuse to go out and go somewhere. And just goes to show you, you ground somebody for 2 months, boy, do they want to get out of the house.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that story about the newspaper boy, that's great, because the business opportunities are there if you look for them. It's just really powerful.
If you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right answers. That's what makes the meta model so perfect. That's why I'm always telling people, you ask the question, how can I make 4 times more money in half the time? Because even if you fail at that, you'll be way ahead. But at least it makes your brain go, how can I do less and make more? And a lot of people only think that in order to do more business, they have to do more work. And that's not the only possibility. And certainly, your ability to con people. Suddenly now, a lot of people are looking to do things on Zoom because there's nothing going on. So this became an opportunity for us to talk to a lot of people in places that I probably would never go. I just, I think we had 13,000 in Brazil the other night, and, full translation, and, they just put it on a YouTube channel and people showed up. I wouldn't have been something I would have thought about, but our ability to contact people all over the world it's going to be a skill we are all going to get better at. And probably wouldn't if this bad thing hadn't happened to us. That we have to look at any restriction on things where, every time there's a financial crisis, some people get rich from it and some people get poorer. And I think we should all be asking the question, how can we be the ones that benefit from this?
And that's great advice. If you look for the opportunity, it's there. So I think tied up with that, the next question links in quite nicely. So what advice would you give to somebody who's got a business at the moment and they're looking to grow it whilst lockdown continues and then after lockdown is over?
Okay, well, by definition, you shouldn't be waiting. Why wait? You should be planning. And instead of waiting, you should be planning so that you can acquire more business than you had before. If you look at the response potential that's being built up, you need to notify those people that it's coming, and it's especially selling the kind of skills that we sell. It's one thing if you're selling tires. Well, sure, we can predict people are going to start driving more. The lockdown is almost over here in Texas for the most part. I think the only thing that's still locked down are movie theaters, football games, basketball games, big things like that. And suddenly, you could watch the price of gasoline starting to go back up, although it's cheaper here than it is there, I'll tell you that. But you can literally watch that people are starting to travel more and all of these kinds of things. And if you're in those businesses, you have to lure those people your way by telling them, notifying them in any way you can. And that especially people that have been in your business, I've started getting like 20 emails a day from people that I did business with. And I think there's a point of saturation that works against you. I get to the point where I just delete them without reading them. You want to make sure that whatever contact you have with people, in whatever form you have it, lures them in. Neiman Marcus, which is a big expensive clothing store, hasn't been open. And they finally sent me one thing telling them the store is going to be open, but first by personal appointment. And but they didn't put their phone number down, so I could go into this wonderful clothing store with somebody who will guide me through it so I don't touch everything, I guess, just the things that I want to buy. But they didn't put their phone number down. And I mean, to me, this is where you really haven't thought through that instead they send an email out to everybody rather than looking at the people that have purchased things there and making a personal contact. Even though, if they don't put their phone number down, they did put my name on the top of the letter. That's nice. But they obviously weren't somebody who knew me at the store. The people at the store who I've met before should have done this. Instead, they had one person who's an IT guy do it. And the IT guy wasn't thinking about what I would want, wasn't talking about the products, wasn't personalizing it to persuade me to come back in and to contact somebody. And, if you got all these employees sitting around and you're paying them to do nothing, I would put them to work acquiring customers, getting customers ready to come back. Look at the resources you have and figure out how to maximize the use of them so that they work 4 times, they create 4 times the income in half the time as well. That's the questions you need to be asking will produce the results that you want, depending upon what kind of business you're in.
It's a great answer.
Why the meta model is such a wonderful tool. It takes you to the limits of what you can imagine and gives you the tools to build new territory in your map. Your understanding is how you represent the world, but it's not the world. Some things are in it, some things are not. And when you know where that boundary is, then you can begin to peek through the window and see what's on the other side. The horizons of possibility.
Definitely. And I love the meta model. I love the Milton model as well, especially because of the work I do with the salespeople and leaders and managers. So following on from that, there was a very consistent theme. Obviously, a lot of people have unfortunately lost their jobs because of what's just happened. A lot of people have been furloughed, so they've had time at home to think about their careers. What advice would you give to somebody that wanted to start a new business now?
Well, 2 things. One is since you got this time, they should have been acquiring information, right, to decide what business and to get whatever training they would need. If you're going to run a business, you have to have some background in accounting. There are certain things you need to know. Certainly, you need to know a little bit more about IT than I did. When I started out, computers were in 4-story buildings and floppy disks were this big. I didn't realize how integral this would be. And, a lot of times we just rely on other people. And the more you rely on them, the more expensive it becomes. So, this is the time where if you have spare time, just don't think, well, I would like to start a business. Think of all the components to business it's going to take to run it. Because for you to be in charge, you have to be at least a little bit of a master of every skill so that you can check up and find out that people are doing their job correctly. I've hired people that were experts and they've been a big disappointment and it always costs you a lot of money. Then you need to make a plan. You have to go into the future and see the thing running perfectly and smoothly. And I mean detailed throughout the day and with all the people that would be involved, and then re-engineer it backwards to the present to find out all the things you would have to accomplish to get it so that it was open and making money. Because the only businesses that will survive are the ones that are making a profit.
And again, I mean, this is where NLP is so powerful because we can go into the future, we can see what success looks like, and then we can look back and we can see what we need to do to get there. And certainly that's a technique I use, when I run my business practitioner courses. And that I think just gives people that really powerful anchor that they've got in the future. That
especially in these dark times where people have lost their job, the question is, are you going to wait for somebody to hire you? Or are you going to create opportunities in your own life? Just keep in mind something that I've always told myself since I was young, which is that you can only see the stars in the night. And when things get dark, you can see bright things that are way off in the distance. So if there's darkness has come over your normal way of life, look at it and then look out and see where the points of light are. And then imagine how to get there. And if you put yourself in where you would like to be and reverse engineer it, you could see what the logical steps you would have to fulfill. And, you know, if you're waiting for the world to take care of you, you'll discover in the end, all that happens is that you get doled out very small amounts. You know, the welfare systems are there to catch people falling through the cracks. Unfortunately, they don't let go of a lot of people. So, you know, in the US, we gave people their unemployment and a little extra money. And when things began to open up, they didn't want to go back to work. Well, they also weren't sitting there thinking, you know, maybe I don't want to go back to work. Maybe I want to start my own business. What business would it be? What would I enjoy doing every day that I'd be really good at? And what do I need to know so that being good at it, because you may be the best mechanic in the world, it doesn't mean you can run a garage, because you have to acquire customers, you have to buy parts, you have to do all kinds of things. And when you can run through a day of a business and find out everything you need, then you can figure out how to get good at all of those things and put them into a package so that when you start something, you start it fast, you expand fast, and you grow fast and you become successful at it. And it doesn't matter what kind of business it is. It's always going to have those components to it.
Yeah. So on that note, do you think, is it possible to monetize anything? Can you make a business out of anything? And I know we were chatting before about my friend who's, you know, she sold her ability to sleep and she's made a business out of that.
Well, if you can sell your ability to sleep, but not to sleep, but to monitor that sleep.
Yeah.
That she not only had the ability to sleep, but she monitored people sleeping. So, you know, when you put those two things together and start selling it to the right people, then, you know, then it becomes business. But there's, oddly enough, that, you know, people have monetized some of the oddest things in the world. When I lived in Santa Cruz many years ago, there was a guy who, for lack of a description, was not what you would consider the smartest guy in the world. But he went in his backyard and started picking up rocks and giving them names and putting them in boxes and taking and selling them to gift stores as the easiest pet to take care of. And, you know, even before the internet, it went viral and he made millions of dollars selling rocks as pets because they don't poop. You don't need to feed them. You can leave them and go away for the weekend. You know, it's amazing the things that you can monetize, but, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've just suddenly become smart at business. He then took all this money and invested it in things that didn't work because, you know, he didn't fill a need for things. He did try to do something that everybody had already done better than him. And, you know, he made bad investments. And whether you're making good investments or bad investments has to do with your ability to make good decisions. Because you make one good decision doesn't mean they'll all be good. So you need to have a reference point to be able to check your decision making, find out which ones are good ones and which ones aren't. And monetary income is a good way of checking that. When you're doing something that doesn't work, it continues to not work extremely well.
That's really cool. I think that there'll be people at the end of this webinar now going out to their gardens to see what kind of rocks they've got.
Yeah, well, it's all about timing, right?
So we had a couple of questions came in around strategies and strategy elicitation. So there were a couple of people who said, I really struggle to elicit other people's strategies when talking to them in business. For example, as a salesperson talking to a customer, what advice can you give me to get better at strategy elicitation in such a situation?
Well, it's all boils down to whether you invest the time to elicit strategies from people in general so that you become familiar, especially when we're talking about buying strategies. Because buying strategies are about there's a point of conviction where somebody actually buys something versus, you know, this is why in seminars I have people think of something they bought and didn't, that they, you know, really wanted, but they didn't buy it. Whether it was a dress or a car or a bicycle, it doesn't matter what it is, and something that they saw they wanted and they bought. So that when you compare these two things, you begin to notice that the difference, that it has to do with distance, it has to do with things. And, you know, when I took the time to stop and sell cars for a while so that I could I could tweak the sales training program I designed, which was originally designed for a consulting firm and then later on for an oil company and, and different people. When I tweaked it, I picked something that was difficult. And it was in the middle of the oil embargo, and people were waiting in line to buy gasoline, so nobody was buying big cars. I went and sold the cars that consumed the most gas, just because it was difficult. And I took the time to do that to hone my skills. And if people are coming in the door and you think that you can't use them as an example, if let's say your sales ratio, let's say you're 80% of the people that come in the door you're selling to and 20% you aren't. Those 20% are the laboratory by which you get to learn. If you walk in the door and your intuitions say this guy is not going to buy anything, this is the time to start really asking questions. Have you ever seen something, you wanted it, and bang, you just bought it? Has there ever been something that you kind of wanted, but you just didn't buy? And you just ask them the difference between them. Sometimes I think people who know NLP are afraid to be blatant with people. The one thing people are all interested in is themselves. Mm-hmm. And when you start to ask questions about their thinking, I've done it on park benches. I sat down on a bus bench one time and started asking somebody questions about the difference between these things. They were waiting for the bus. The bus just happened to be in front of my office. And I went out just to get some sun, and I literally looked at the sky and I said, you ever seen something and you just really wanted it, and man, you just bought it? And then sometimes you see something you want it, you don't, what do you think the difference between those things are? And this guy goes, well, sometimes, it's like it's right in front of your face and you have to have it. And sometimes, and he points to the other side. So the more you watch and listen, and, the world is an experimental laboratory if you ask the right questions and don't sound like a psychologist. Because if you sound like, you're picking through somebody's mind to find out about it, that's different than if you're just having a conversation. And sometimes I use myself, I go, sometimes I see something is right for me, man, I feel it, and bam, I'm right there. And sometimes, I just can't get myself to buy something I want. You know what I'm talking about? And then people will just rattle on, and you get to watch their hand gestures, which way things are going, their eye movement patterns. All of those things are there sort of you to collect information. The more experience it, the more you control the content of the subject, so that it's not about an object you're trying to sell, but about making decisions. The more you find out the difference between wanting things, desiring things, and deciding things. And the more you understand where the moment of decision is, the more it tells you where to put the brochure, it tells you how to package your phrasing, and the more it becomes familiar. People walk in, you can see their eye movements and the hesitation in their face, especially on big ticket items. And a lot of the decision making that people make about things, like I had a friend that owned a real estate office, and I used to just sit in there and have coffee with them. And people would come in and they'd come in and they'd go, I have to have a house with a big backyard, but all the ones I've looked at are too expensive. And, and I discovered if you looked at them and said, what are you going to do with the big backyard? Do you just like mowing grass? What is it? And they'd go, well, I have a lot of kids. They need a place to play. So if you live next to a park, you wouldn't have to mow the grass and your kids would have a place to play. You could, finding out that a lot of people don't know, they think that there's a way to get what they want, and they focus on the way and not what they want. Mm-hmm. So they end up with something they don't want. And with my clients, this happens all the time. They come in, they go, if I could just marry a pretty girl. And I go, what are you going to do? Hang her on the wall and taxiderm her so she doesn't get older? It's, I don't think that's what you want. You want this because it's going to make you, you think it's going to make you feel a certain way, but it may not be the best way to get there. It's that thing. If I had this person and I looked that way, then it would match a picture in my head, and I think it will make me happy for years, but unfortunately, that's not what happens. You know, that matching a picture doesn't necessarily get you what you want. It only gets it for an instance. And, you know, it's like everything else. You know, if you get a really cool car, you still have to take care of it. So if you don't enjoy taking care of the car, you're better off leasing one and getting another one, letting somebody else take care of it. You know, I think part of the reason Uber got so popular so quickly is a lot of people discovered they didn't like taking care. A lot of people don't even want to wash their car, for heaven's sakes. My car looks exactly like it was the day I bought it, inside and out. And, you know, that's because I like the process of taking care. I like it to take my car down and have somebody watch it, have it come out and be shiny and nice. But some people don't have the patience to sit there for 30 minutes. And it's one of those things that if you don't enjoy the process, then you end up getting something and you got to constantly look at it and go, you know, it's not, they were happy the day they bought it, but they're not happy afterwards because they don't think about owning it. A lot of people want a relationship, but they don't want what's in the relationship.
Yeah.
You know, and if you don't have long movies to make decisions, you end up making decisions on still pictures that should be made out of movies. And for those of us in business, we have to understand if we want return clientele, we have to sell them the movie that includes bringing in or more people. I don't close sales without people making a commitment to bring me new customers. That's part of their job from buying something. I'll get them to make the right decision. They'll be happy with that decision. But then at that point in time, they kind of work for me.
That's brilliant. I think loads of people just got relationship advice out of that one as well as business advice. So that's pretty cool. Thank you.
Well, they think of closing a sale as the end. I think of it as the beginning.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you. So a question came in around this theme as well. So I manage a lot of employees, in some cases up to 20 or 30, maybe more. I find it really hard to understand their motivations. How can I use NLP to get better at understanding their motivation?
Okay, well, the first thing is when you hire employees, you should have an understanding of how they motivate themselves or fail to, because it will tell you the amount of time that it's going to take you to keep them motivated. So an understanding of strategies gives you the ability to do better selection and recruiting. Now, once you've already hired them, and especially in some countries like Sweden where you can't even fire people, once you hire them, it becomes a commitment. You need to understand how they motivate themselves or what motivates them so that you can provide it. Some people are all about moving away from difficulties. Some people, it's all about deadlines. And if they don't have clear deadlines, then they don't get to them. And depending upon how people motivate themselves, because there are different strategies for motivation, that sometimes you just have to alter the strategy inside of a person. You have to train them to feel better about finishing, because many people are motivated because they have a big picture and they get all worked up and then they start running out of steam. And to me, I want people to feel stronger the closer they get to completing something. And then I can put a new picture in for them to complete. And whether completing is getting a certain number of sales done by the end of the week, I want them to feel better the closer they get to fulfilling that, and then to reset the whole thing up for the next week if they are somebody that operates off of the short run. If they have a longer timeline, then you need to do it differently. And your ability to gather information, since they're around all the time, it shouldn't be that difficult to understand where the difficulty comes with them. And sometimes you could just ask people, you go, when are you the most motivated? And listen to their answer and recapitulate the circumstances, To me, a good understanding of motivation strategies is essential for somebody to be in a management position.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I mean, I work with a lot of managers who don't seem to know their people at all, but then some great ones as well who seem to know, the ins and outs and their inside leg measurements and have a really good relationship with them. Okay. So again, a consistent theme that came in was obviously so much of NLP revolves around calibration. So what advice would you give to people who are trying to calibrate a client or a colleague online as we move into this brave new world of Zoom and video conferencing?
Well, to understand that when you're talking to somebody on a computer or you're talking to somebody on a telephone, it's limited channel communication. And the less you're actually there, the more you have to ask precise questions. And, how do you know when when the product is right? And this is the moment. How do you make your decisions? And, to me, when I'm talking to somebody on Zoom, and even initially, and they go, I'd like to hire you to help me with this problem. I'm going to start out with the end. How would you know when you don't need me anymore? How do you know when this is going to be done? What would tell you? What do you have to see? What do you have to hear? So I can tell you, what do I need to see and hear in you to know that you're finished and that this is done? How would you know when to make the decision to hire my company to be a consultant, or to my company to come in and re-roof your house? I don't care what it is. If you don't know how they would know, then you don't stand a chance of knowing how you would know that you're doing the right thing. And most of the time, if you watch their eye movements, their hand gestures, and they go, well, there's a lot of different companies. And when you go, how do you know which one's going to be the right company? And they go, well, I'll have this idea. And you go, what does it look like? And they go, well, when I can see that all my needs are being met, or whatever it is. You have to watch the hand gestures, the eye movements, because if they're looking to make a big picture, and that picture has to be close, even your hand gestures have to put ideas up and push towards them. Remember, they're looking from the opposite point of view. You can't say a big picture is great, because suddenly it'll be further away.
Mm-hmm.
Closer is when you push your hands away from you. Further away is when you pull your hands back. So it may be closer for you, but not for them. And you have to have that reverse point of view, so that you're almost stepping inside of them and listening to what they're describing, and then placing it outside of yourself.
That's really good. Okay, cool. So kind of connected with that, questions just popped up in the chat box. Are you planning to do any training yourself online?
That's what I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So when you say, am I planning to? Yes. I've got about another hour's worth. Yes.
I think people meant more specifically, are you running any kind
Yes, I am, and I'm trying to look at ways of overcoming the limitations of being online. Mm-hmm. Like being able to have some people here so that I can demonstrate, so that people out there can see how it's done. Mm-hmm. One of the limitations I find online is that I can't show people things. And we've talked about taking clips from other seminars, but I prefer live things. So I would like to get some people in the room with me. And in order to do that, I have to have better camera equipment. Uh-huh. And so I've just purchased some so that I can do that sort of thing. And, Kathleen and I have also talked about, I'm going to do some small seminars so I can spread people out. But I don't think I'm as afraid of the virus as everybody else is. That to me, if you have a good, strong immune system, and you check people, like, I went in to the doctor's office and they checked everybody's temperature on the way in and cleaned our hands. And, I don't think I would like to do a small seminar with everybody having a mask on, but if they were nervous enough and wanted to wear one, that's fine. Mm-hmm. To me, if I'm going to do a small personal change workshop, I think that, we want strong, healthy people there. And, if we clean the chairs and spread out a little bit, I think we'll be fine. Online, I don't know exactly what we'll come up with, but I'm sure between me and John and Kathleen, we'll come up with something interesting.
Mm-hmm. I'm just laughing because
I kind of like these things. These are easy. You know, I get dressed, I walk in the other room, I go back and I can change and jump in the pool. That's nice.
You'll be pleased to know there's a few people volunteering to come and work with you live, so they're obviously not afraid of the virus either. This is pretty cool. Okay. So a question came in, so I really like representation systems, and I've heard Kathleen's story about the guy who buys his wife flowers because he wants to show her he loves her, but she wants to be told how much he loves her. So have you ever used rep systems to influence somebody in business, and can you give an example of that?
Well, at every turn of the road, I'm always paying attention to how people think. And by the way, everybody's got 3 strings to their bow, at least. That while she wants to be told, she also wants to be shown. Mm-hmm. But it's all about the sequence. You know, he's giving her flowers to show her that he loves her, but he's not opening her mouth. And I think, you know, conviction comes from visual, auditory, and kinesthetic representations. That, because I'm sure at some point he wants to hear it and feel it as well. Uh-huh. Otherwise, it's not much of a relationship. It's more about sequence, and it's more about voice tone. It's not enough to say I love you, because you can say I love you and mean you don't. You know, of course I love you. You know, that doesn't sound very loving. So, you know, the auditory component, you know, you could say no and mean yes. So it's not just about the representational system, it's about the details of it, and it's about the sequence of it. The question is, where do you start? And how often do you have to say it, and with what tone of voice? He's probably saying I love you, but not in a way that's convincing. You have to say it in a way where the tone of voice convinces it. Because somebody could say, will you go out with me? And you could look at them and go, oh, sure. And it doesn't mean sure, it means never. So again, it's not about the representational systems, it's about the details of it, the submodalities, as we like to call them. And the devil is always in the detail. Mm-hmm. I'm sure if he never gave her flowers, she'd be bitching about that too. So yeah, you want the visual aspect, but you have to do it sequentially right. You have to be able to say it. And it's not just that you say it, it's how you say it and when you say it. And sometimes you have to ask to find out ahead of time. What would make you feel loved? When do I have to say it, and what details? And, you know, it's not just giving somebody flowers on their anniversary that makes them feel loved. The devil is in the detail. And, you know, I'm sure there are lots of things he does to show her that he loves her. He takes out the garbage, he does this, and he does that. But sometimes you have to tell people, I'm only doing this because I love you. Otherwise, take the garbage out yourself if you don't feel loved.
Well, I'm sure that happens a lot. And then
yeah, well, it's also the tone of voice that you say it.
Yeah.
You say, I'm doing this so that you'll feel loved. And, you know, then you're saying it and doing it at the same time.
Okay. And then, I mean, within business yourself, have you ever had that situation with a client where you've delivered?
Well, with all my clients, of course, you know, that to me, it's a big thing about the moments where people become convinced that you're the right person to do something. And, I was being considered as a consultant for a business once. And a client came in and they were just over the moon unhappy about something. And the instinct of the employees was to justify what they had done. And I walked up and I said to the person, I said, you're absolutely right. I hate to see you so upset. And I put my hands on the side of their head and went, relax. And just put them into a deep, relaxed chair, put them into a chair, told them to take a deep breath, and that when they opened their eyes, they would realize that this was a mistake and that the employee needed to know about it. So I would tell the employee about it. In the meanwhile, I would find them a new salesperson who would understand them And then I literally had them open their eyes and walk over, introduced them to somebody else, walked over to the other person that they were complaining about and said, come here. I said, this could have been a great opportunity for you to learn. Because when people come in and say you made a mistake, if you agree with them, they can't complain about it. You know,
Yeah.
no, when you tell people they're right, they never go, no, I'm not. It just doesn't happen. And sometimes you have to say what people want to hear for them to feel that you're the right business.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned around and looked at the guy who owned it. He goes, that was really weird. And I said, yeah, sometimes you have to do something new to get new results. Otherwise you lose customers.
Mm-hmm.
All I was thinking about is how do we keep the good customer? And sometimes providing something that people wouldn't do normally convinces them that you're the right person to be helping them.
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of questions that popped up in the box again, and I mean I've heard you tell this story, but I think it's worth repeating. So, where did NLP come from, and where did you get the name? And I think this is a great story because I've heard you tell it many times.
Well, to start with, what's called NLP used to be called meta model. Mm-hmm. And the meta model itself started producing lots of other techniques. And as a mathematician, you know, a lot of people think of NLP as a form of therapy, but I don't. Even the Merriam-Webster dictionary describes it as a self-help system, which it is not. It's the name that I gave to a whole set of techniques I had created. And it's mostly a methodology and an attitude. And when I got pulled over by a policeman, he asked me, I said, why was going so fast? I said, I'm going to work. He said, what do you do? And I said, looked on the floor, and there was John Grinder's linguistic book, which had just come out. And it's an introduction to transformational grammar. There was a training manual to a PDP 1134A. And there was a neurology book, which had descriptions of the motor cortex. And I looked down and I said, I'm a neuro-linguistic programmer. Because when you want to make up words, you take two really good words that you like and take half of each one. You know, that's an algorithm I use for making up words when I need to rename something that doesn't have a name. So if you like the word holography and the word pragmatic, and you go pragmographics, and you have a word. I taught that to Todd Epstein once, and he, you know, you make up a word and then you make up the content of what goes with the word. I wanted to have a name, and I looked down and took the beginning of three things and put them together. And then I asked my students at the time if they could come up with something better, and they brought me lists of things, but I didn't like it. I went to the hardware store and had a sign made, and they actually misunderstood me. So the sign said Nervo-linguistic programming, which sat on my door for a couple of years till they made me a new sign.
And that's where it came from. It's just every time I hear that, it just like blows my mind. I think it's such a great story.
Well, sometimes if you're doing something different than other people, you need to take two words that have a really great ring to them, mm-hmm. and take half of one ring and half of the other and come up with a new name. Because if you don't, you know, at one time, you know, there were a lot of sciences, and they would take part of one science, part of another. So they had neurobiology. And the difference is NLP is not interdisciplinary, it's metadisciplinary. It's about how the people in the fields think. So I needed to have a word that was about changing the way you think and changing the way other people think, and eliciting how their thinking style produced successful behavior. NLP is not an archaeological dig into what went wrong with you like psychology. We look at the very best people that are getting the best results and delineate how they think consciously and unconsciously that produces a better learning style. And, you know, the easiest example of this is spelling. For my entire life, you know, growing up in school, they gave us phonetic spellers. And phonetics is not, spelling is not a phonetic task. especially in English. You can almost do it in German, but in English, English is like a language of witches made. You know, I before E, except after C, and silent letters and long vowels and short vowels. Sounds like a sailor song. And, but, you know, good spellers, when I went and found people who won spelling bees, they told me they made pictures of the words and that the letters were about this big. And when I went to school, they gave me little tiny lists of words and said, memorize them. They didn't, when I taught kids who were bad spellers to take these little words and make big ones, to make the letters each a different color and go read them forwards and backwards, and said, what color is the L? Then I knew they were having eidetic remembered pictures. And suddenly they went from being bad spellers to being good spellers because they were using a proper mental strategy. Unconsciously, consciously they had big pictures, and unconsciously, when it was the right picture, they had a different feeling than when it was the wrong picture. Mm-hmm. So teaching people that strategy allowed them to learn to spell better. You know, I did musical strategies, athletic strategies, architectural strategies, boot designing strategies. And initially, as I went through and found out the difference between people who were successful at things and people who weren't, good salespeople had a different strategy about selling. They had signposts that told them, okay, I have somebody's attention. And now I know how, I understand things about their decisions. I package my sales thing so that it fits the person, and therefore their close ratio goes up. So I'm constantly in all the work that I do, trying to study success, not failure.
Yeah. And I think, so that was a question that came in as well. In terms of modeling excellence, who are the entrepreneurs that you respect or look up to, and why?
Well, that would depend. It's not just being an entrepreneur, it's being an entrepreneur in a certain business. You know, a successful athlete does not necessarily make a good car salesman. So depending upon what you're selling and what you're doing, and, you know, the guys are good. You know, Warren Buffett is really good at picking winning businesses, but he also runs one. And, but the guy who runs a hedge fund is thinking differently than the person who's running, you know, a car lot. And so depending upon what it is that, if I'm going to get hired as a consultant to help somebody to be successful, I'll go out and find people in that business who are successful and find out what they did. I don't like reinventing the wheel. I like to know what the wheel is, and then I put it on the car.
Makes perfect sense, I think. Yeah. So there's, I mean, a lot of people out there that are doing very well in businesses. And back in the day, obviously you were, you worked with Virginia Satir, people like that, and learned a lot.
Because they were good at getting people to change, not because I believed their theory of personality. Okay. You know, Milton was a great hypnotist. You want to be a great hypnotist, you learn from the best hypnotist. You don't necessarily do everything the way he would do it, because as he was very good at it as a hypnotist, and he was really outside of the box compared to most psychiatrists. When he thought about change, he wanted to get people out of the hospital. He wanted them to get a job, get married, have children, and send them a present. That was his definition of success. That's not necessarily my definition of success. But as a hypnotist, he was the best on the planet. So I wanted to learn how he thought about hypnosis, how he mastered his language patterns. I don't think, you know, Milton's quote about the book Patterns One, you know, he said it was an oversimplification of the infinite complexity of the things he'd been doing for years without knowing about them. Now, like all things with Milton, I'm not sure if it's a compliment or not, but I still put it on the book because it was such a good example of how language worked. When they asked Milton one time, they said, you know, he said, you know, are you using hypnosis all the time? And he went, invariably. Well, is that invariably yes or invariably no? With Milton, everything was ambiguity all the time. And with me, when I wanted to learn about ambiguity, he's the perfect guy to study. When I want to learn about hypnosis, he's the perfect guy to learn. How those are applied is an individual. I never wanted to be Milton Erickson or to be like him. I didn't want his problems or his limitations. I wanted to master the skills that he had and apply them in other places. His language patterns worked really good for salespeople, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be Milton Erickson to do it.
Great. Okay, cool. So again, a consistent theme amongst the questions that were sent in. My partner or my spouse doesn't really get NLP, and I would love to be a trainer and launch my own NLP business. How can I use NLP to influence them?
Well, love is not based on agreement. Mm-hmm. It's based on the appreciation of difference. And if you have some vested interest, and if you're going to be an NLP trainer, then you have to learn to be tolerant, because not everybody wants to talk about NLP all the time. I used to say early in my life, I didn't date girls who did NLP. And, certainly my first wife, Paula, knew nothing about it nor cared about it. And there were certain interests that we shared. We both liked art, we liked music, we liked all kinds of things. But she really had very little interest in an NLP, and I had very little interest in talking about it when I was at home. I'm married to somebody who is much more educated now than Paula was. She's a doctor, and she was a chiropractor and a nutritionist, and has an interest in NLP, but we don't spend time talking about it. I don't think that your love life and your interests have to be shared all the time. That a lot of people believe that relationships are based on shared interest, and sometimes that's true, but most of the time it's based on your ability to appreciate the difference between that person and you. Otherwise, you're marrying yourself. And I don't even get along with me inside my head, let alone on the outside. So I just don't find that that's the right approach to forcing people to share your interest. Uh-huh. What you love about somebody else should be different than you, and otherwise you don't need them. And to me, all of the things that Glenda knows that I don't know, and things that she's interested in that I'm not interested in, are what makes her different than me, and that's what I like about her. And I think compelling your spouse to have an interest in NLP is a mistake, and that better to have skills and use them than to make it equal footing.
Uh-huh. Okay, and then another interesting question has just popped up in the question box. So back in the 70s, back in the day, what was it that first kind of prompted you to get interested in people, modeling excellence, whatever you want to call it, before you had this thing called NLP?
Well, I just like things that work better than things that don't work. I used to fix clocks and radios and anything. You used to be able to go to the dump and get old clocks and radios and bring them home because nobody wanted them. And I would bring them home, fix them, polish them up, and sell them. When I got interested in logic and mathematics and computers, what I liked about them is a computer program either runs or it doesn't. And it's not about philosophy. And even though I studied philosophy, the thing about philosophy is it's all based on agreement. People have, you can read journal articles in the field of philosophy or science or all of these things, and they're like the longest arguments you could have. Somebody says something and 6 minutes later, somebody disagrees with it. And there's an overwhelming thing in philosophy that if you don't have the same philosophy, there's something wrong with you. I hear it all the time now about politics. Oddly enough, people used to be able to disagree about politics and be married. I don't think that you see much of that anymore, because there's a sinister thing that if you don't agree with my ideas, there's something wrong with you. And to me, I actually like it when people don't agree with me, because the fact that they have a different point of view means there's either something to learn or something else to learn. And if people don't agree with me, I don't think it's because they're a bad person. I don't think it's because they're not smart. I think it's because they have different ideas than me. And in free societies, that should be overwhelmingly acceptable. That's what allows us all to live in the same place together. And when I look at what's going on now, what I don't like about it is the fascist attitude. The fact that somebody built a statue 100 years ago who had ideas that I don't approve of, so I'm going to destroy their statue, is what the Taliban does, not what Americans and English and free societies do. And to destroy the symbols of what I disagree with, instead of thinking them as art projects. When people built statues, they were art projects. And the fact that in England, you can find statues of George Washington when actually he was a traitor, is, you know, shows us that there's a lot of ideas that aren't around anymore. And the fact that, you know, there are statues of people that believe things that I don't believe. You know, I'm sorry, I don't think we need to destroy statues of Lenin just because I don't think he had ideas I agree with. And Trotsky and Stalin, all the rest of them. Destroying the symbols of history doesn't change history. It just means that you're intolerant. And when I look at what goes on right now with people being intolerant of ideas, I find especially that liberals suffer from this, and really right-wing conservatives. They want to destroy the symbols of ideas rather than share ideas. And to me, you know, if people disagree with me, well, they disagree with me. In my career, I get a lot of that. You know, a lot of people think NLP is bad inherently somehow. And since I'm the symbol of that, a lot of people, you know, get angry at me about silly things that other people do. And I find that's not a good way to live. It's very stressful. When people tell me they disagree with me, I tell them they're right, they do.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when we put the adverts out for this webinar, you know, we got loads of comments on Facebook about NLPs like brainwashing and stuff. There's a lot of people out there who, you know, don't really know what it is, and they've already formed opinions about it. It's pretty crazy. So I'm just conscious, we've been going for an hour. Are you okay to go on, or do you want to take a break?
Let's take a short break. I just want to get my blood sugar up. Let's take a short break. Let's take 10 minutes.
10 minutes is brilliant. Okay, so ladies and gents, I'll see you back here in 10 minutes and we will carry on with the questions. So go and have a bio break, get some fresh air, whatever you need to do. And we'll see you back here in 10 minutes, which should be just about 8:10. We're in the UK, and I guess that's about 10
okay, because I was going to say that's a long time from now.
Just call it 10 minutes wherever you are.
All right, 10 minutes wherever you are.
Cool.
Hey, Tom. Can't hear you. You must be.
How you doing?
Mic is off.
Can you hear me now?
Are we broadcasting?
I think we still are, yeah.
Oh, okay. Want to pop in, see how you doing?
So
I've been
far,
popped in.
the comments are coming up in the box are great. Everybody's enjoying it, yeah. So I think people can hear us. People saying hi, John.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, lots of people saying hi.
I give you a quick video. Hello
Hey,
there.
there he is.
Hello, 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 hello. We're just kind of peeking in here and paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah, everybody's saying hello. Yep.
That's one hat.
Can you see that? Yeah, I love the hat. That's cool.
I have a few different hats. I don't usually wear my favorite hat.
We're on it.
Some people, well, it's a little bit political. I'm not really, I'm really apolitical, but you know, it's more constitutional than anything. So
That's cool.
I think everybody should wear a hat.
I agree. I agree.
Get the hat that works the best for you.
I'd probably wear a bowler.
That'd be cool. I must have about, no joke, I must have at least 50 or 60 different truckers' hats. Yeah, different things on them, of course. Beanie for Tom.
Anything that keeps my head warm. Anything that keeps my head warm.
With a copter thing on the top.
Yeah, that's right. It's like, yeah, Paula is definitely not an e-bowler, just a bowler.
Hello, Paula. All right, I'm going to disappear. I'm sure Rich will be back soon.
No problem. Thank you for popping in. Always good to see you. See you later.
Yeah. I'll see you soon, right?
Yeah. Cheers, John.
Cheers.
Okay. So yeah, so guys, if you can see that Lizzie, yeah, we've got a business practitioner course that starts online next week on the 27th. So it'll be 5 4-hour modules every Saturday starting from next week. We're going to look at the business applications of NLP and how you can use that. What we're not going to do is any of the change work that needs us to be in a room. So things like anchoring, switch patterns, and so on. And if you saw my webinar on Tuesday, it'll be more of the same, just looking at all of the basic core concepts of NLP and how we actually use those, how you can apply those in business, whatever your business is. If you want, we can always have a chat offline.
It's a great program, and Tom's really good at it.
Thanks, John. I didn't realize you were still there.
I'm still here. I'm like stalking and eavesdropping and like, you know, peeping Tomming.
That's cool.
We're always here, Tom. You know that.
Oh, there's Kathy. Oh dear. It's like Jiminy Cricket. It's like my conscience on my shoulder.
We're like, we're like the angel and the devil thing. We just kind of follow
The
around.
Lavals are always watching.
Ah, there's
I won't tell you which one is
I
who.
do.
Hey.
In a counseling session, that's a good question. What strategy would you use to get someone talking who doesn't want to participate in the first session? Throw them out.
Hey.
How did they show up to begin with? You know, why, you know, what got them there?
That's cool. So
A recommendation? Is that what happened? Somebody recommended and they still showed up on their own? Is that it? I don't know.
Could be. Could be. So
I'd vet them to begin with before I even let them show up. Actually, I'd send them all desired state questions and have them send them back before you see them.
there's lots of people saying hi, John. Hi, Kathleen.
Hi.
That's cool. And then, oops, let's get rid of that.
Yeah.
Yep, John Sebastian's here too.
Yeah. Hey, John.
Andrea, not only get them to fill out the desired state questions first, make them pay up front in cash.
Yeah. Boom. There's lots of interest. There's a really interesting question just coming. Actually, I think because it involves Andy the schizophrenic. So I think I'll ask Richard that after the break.
Yeah, I'm not good at that stuff, but I can always ask myself about it.
Do you talk to yourself, John?
When and who and with whom?
Do you ever get an answer?
Ask Kathleen. I was talking out loud the other day. I was practicing giving somebody a load of well, basically a tongue lashing when I was practicing first out loud.
Oh dear. So, John Sebastian, if you're there, can I just ask you? I appear to have lost Richard.
Why did the pie cross the road?
I have no idea.
Now I want to
Sorry,
know.
what happened?
Well, at the moment, I can see myself. If I go to gallery view, I can see myself, but I can't see Richard.
It's because he turned his video off
Ah, okay, that's cool.
while he was on break.
I was just panicking then.
I thought it was.
We've trained him well.
That's cool.
Come on,
So,
Duncan. You're going to tell those British joke things because it was meat and tatty. At least I understand what that is. I don't know about
Meat and tatty.
I don't know about John Sebastian.
That's right. I think it's more of a Scottish thing. There'll be neeps and tatties or meat and tatties.
Been there. Yeah,
John
somebody served me up that their haggis one time.
Haggis. Haggis is great.
Sorry.
You can't be haggis.
Okay, you can turn my video back on.
Any
Hey,
meatballs anytime.
All
See you
right,
guys.
everyone,
cheers. So, John Sebastian, do I do that on my end or does Richard do that his end?
Richard, if you click the start video next to,
It says unable to start video.
you have to enable it again, Tom.
How did I do that last time?
settings.
What am I looking for? I can't see it on this screen. All right, bear with me. No, I'm not seeing it.
Well, I didn't touch anything on my end, so you must have done something on your end.
I'm pretty certain it probably was me at my end, Richard. Let me just find out.
My little square even disappeared.
Yeah, I've seen that at my end. I can't see you either. I can hear you. Hang on. No.
How about next to the little video thing?
Yeah. So, Tom, if you go to participants,
Yeah.
on the bottom right, it should say invite, mute me, and then more.
Hang on. I think I'm looking at it now. So more. Yeah.
Yep. Click more, and then allow participants to start video.
Yeah, I've done that one. So Richard, that should be there for you now.
All righty.
Yeah.
All right. Play nice. I'm going away again.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.
So am I back?
You are back. You are back in the land of the living. So whilst you were out, there was an interesting question came in that kind of involves.
Once I'm out, the interesting.
Yeah,
Now you're starting to sound like Milton.
I will pick my words more carefully.
Out, the interesting questions come in.
Yeah, yeah, that was good. So there's a question that kind of related to obviously Andy the schizophrenic, who I think a lot of us know about. But it was more to do with this modern day phenomenon of narcissists, which I think we're hearing more and more about. And in the same way that you work with Andy and obviously got some great results, what advice would you give to somebody that was working with a narcissist?
Don't.
Yeah.
My first advice is don't. But if you're going to work with a narcissist, that you have to get them into the loop. This is where you take strategies and you turn them on themselves. And since narcissists, everything is about them, you have to get them to clearly understand that you don't believe that they're smart enough and good enough to make things about other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's when you turn a strategy on itself, all strategies will destroy themselves at that moment in time, including this one. It's this sentence is false. You go, clearly they're not intelligent enough to take other people into account or to understand other people. And if they think they're the end all of end all, they're going to have to start doing it. And you'll have to be very clear about how they would know when they were doing it.
That makes sense. Okay, cool. So that was a good one. And anybody who hasn't seen the videos of Richard working with Andy, it's well worth checking them out. It's just incredible, I think. So that's pretty cool. So going back to...
Those are on NLP Eternal, I believe, aren't they?
They are definitely over there, absolutely. So I would go and check that out.
Okay.
And sign up for that for all the other great stuff that's there as well. So coming back to the current world that we live in with COVID and lockdown and everything, again, there were a couple of questions that came in around this idea of, I've really enjoyed working from home. I've been more productive working from home. Can I use NLP to convince my boss that I should be allowed to continue to work from home once lockdown is over?
Well, I don't necessarily know that people are more productive working at home. They may believe they are, but I'm not sure that that's true. The question of how you would convince your boss to let you stay at home and work, I think if you are more productive, that would be easy to convince them of. First thing I would do would be to check to make sure that that's actually the case. And then I would be looking for ways to verify that that's the case. Because if you can work from home, you're not spending time driving there and driving back. And if, there are some jobs where you can log on and measure your results. If you're selling more of your product from home than you are sitting in a store, that would be easy to convince somebody of. But you have to find the source by which you can convince your boss of that. You can't just say, how could I convince him of it? You could convince him of it whether it was true or not, but I'm not the guy that wants to help you do that. I'm the guy that wants you to take the facts and the profitability of your doing it, and to be able to show him so that you could show him how you could be more productive from home than you could be at work. Because there are a lot of distractions at work. Even when I ran a company, I kept my office in a different building because I couldn't get anything done. There were people coming in all day asking me questions, most of which were nonsense. So again, the question is, how do you convince your boss? Well, the answer is in the question, by being able to go to the bottom line and showing them that you're being more productive.
Okay. So the next question came in, it goes back to the Milton model again, because obviously that's multifaceted. But do you have a favorite part of the Milton model that you've used in business?
Well, yes. The more pattern is definitely one of my favorite things out of the Milton. And that when people come in and they go, well, I'm not ready to buy this yet. And you go, and the more you're unsure and the more sure you'll be. There are lots of linguistic patterns by which you can turn a situation around. People come in and they go, I'm so sure of this. And you go, are you sure enough to be unsure? People go, well, I could never buy a Mercedes. And you go, so you're sure that you would never want a Mercedes? Are you sure enough to be unsure so that I can show you all the benefits of buying it? To me, the more pattern, the sure enough to be unsure, all of those things are where you can punch holes through certainty to get to uncertainty so that you can get to a greater understanding of how a product or service would be useful.
Okay. That's cool. There's a question just
definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah, I like that one as well. And I mean, I've heard you tell those stories before, and I think they're really, really powerful. Obviously, I love those as a salesperson. There's a question that's just popped up in the question answer box. Says, I've had a few clients that I've helped with NLP, but after a month or so, I noticed that they were regressing or sliding backwards. What would you do in that situation with a client?
Well, I'd go back and finish my work. That would be how I'd think about it. See, there's two ways. You can go, the client is screwing up, or you can go, I didn't do a complete enough job. And I choose the latter because the lesson about how to be more thorough because if the person is sliding back into their old patterns, it means you didn't do a complete enough job, which means now you can go back and you can look at the client and you can go, well, I've noticed that you're starting to go back into your old ways, and I want to know where that doorway was, because obviously we didn't shut it tight enough. And most of this has to do with the way in which you future pace a client, because if the circumstances can beat through the doorway of what you built, say if you build people a new representation, you know, so they're depressed and you get them to start being a happier person more of the time, and they start sliding back into being more and more depressed, it means you weren't thorough enough. So you need to go back in and you go, okay, where was the temptation? You know, to be, you know, suddenly depression is looking better than happiness. You're not thinking about this correctly. So therefore I didn't do a thorough enough job. So let's go back and take a look at where the door opened up to go back into your old ways, especially with drug addiction, smoking, all of that stuff. You know, overeating, you know, people will go, you know, you get them into good habits. And as soon as they start to, if you don't future pace them, if you don't give them get out of stupid free cards. In my book that just came out, Thinking on Purpose, I have a whole thing about getting out of stupid free cards, so that when people make mistakes, rather than it thinking, oh, well, the whole thing went south, what difference does it make? And getting back into bad habits, they go, aha. So that you tell them, look, in the future, there's going to be a night where you make a mistake. You're going to overeat once. And when you do, you pull out your get out of free stupid card and you get back on the highway to not making that mistake, so that it becomes a long-term commitment. You want people to be able to give themselves the luxury of doing things. My engineer used to look forward to Fridays because his wife was a heart surgeon's nurse. And she told him, you know, we're going to exercise, we're going to diet, and then we're going to eat carbs on Friday. Other than that, carbs are off the, you know, no carbs. So he lived pretty much carb free, but he looked forward to Friday because it was carb day. So he could have Mexican food and he could have this. So whatever your weakness is, plan for it, make it part of the program, right? So that you're allowed to make mistakes. You know, it's that thing where if you have to be perfect, you're going to fail at it. And when you fail at it, it either means you're going to jump back on the smart wagon or you're going to jump on the stupid wagon.
Brilliant. Okay. So you've worked with a lot of businesses of different sizes, from, you know, kind of sole traders through to big organizations.
I've worked with businesses that install kitchen counters. I've worked with businesses that sold cars. I've worked with businesses that sold furnitures, and I've worked with Fortune 500 companies, and I've worked with things the size of militaries. So with me, it runs the entire gamut, and I don't find it particularly different. I look at my skill as going in and designing training, whether I do it with an individual or I do it with the US military. When I leave, I want a program there that trains people. The biggest mistake a business makes is not making it so that somebody documents what they do every day at work. Because if they get sick, you need somebody to fill in for them. If they leave, you need to have a way of training the next person that comes along to replace them.
That kind of, you mind read my next question, because that was, what is the biggest mistake that businesses make? So if it's not documenting, that's obviously a good one.
Now, in other words, everybody, including you who runs the business, at some point has to be replaced. So you have to know what they're doing. And that means you have to know what they do all day long. They make decisions. How do they make them? And so, you know, somebody has to not just document, you know, where they sit and that they answer the phone. They have to document what they do when they answer the phone. Are they just directing phone calls from here and there, or are they looking at that as the opportunity for customer acquisition? Everybody who calls your company wants something, and it's the opportunity for you to expand your business. So a receptionist has to be a really good salesman, and they have to make decisions about where to put that phone call. Do they send them to a salesperson? Do they send them to selection and recruiting? Or do they make sure that that person calls back at a later time? You know, every moment that a business is open is an important moment, or not. And me, I prefer to think of it as an important moment. Everybody who walks through the front door, I consider to be somebody who's going to buy something, a service or a product, or both.
Okay. And then connected with that, obviously, when you're brought into a lot of businesses, it's because they're struggling, they're having problems. What is your favorite?
Sometimes they're struggling, and sometimes they're not able to recapitulate success.
Right.
A lot of times I get hired by a business because they got one guy who designs boots that everybody buys, and 5 people that design boots that hardly anybody buys. So they want to get their other boot designers to do what that guy does. And, you know, I've had people, I went to work for a company that makes jets, and they had a guy who almost always sells jets all day long, and they have other people there that are real hit or miss about closing sales. They get really good leads and they don't close them. And they wanted to get their salesman to do what the good salesman did. So a lot of times I'm hired to model success. A paper company had a guy who could run a machine, and 90% of what he did was perfect, and the other people that ran exactly the same machine didn't get that kind of result. And it turned out it's not what the manufacturer said you were supposed to do, but his ability to listen to the machine and know when to push the button. He was doing something that other people weren't doing. And I find a lot of times when I'm hired, whether somebody knows it or not, that's what I'm there for. I'm there for to look at the things that work versus the things that don't work, so that business works more often. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're just missing big opportunities. I mean, I was hired one time to go in and help an executive because he was having personal problems. And I just wanted to figure out what he did all day that was so stressful, so he didn't go home so stressed out. And when I was there, I discovered that there were all these people coming in, supposedly dumping personal problems on him, but really what they were doing was describing how they were doing their job badly. And so the guy, rather than listening to this as an opportunity to make his business work better, he thought they were dumping personal problems on him, and that he was trying to decide whether to fire him or not.
Okay. If you're brought in to work with a business that is struggling, do you have a favorite strategy or an approach that you take when you go in?
Well, I figure that every bit of noise you hear, you know, everything that everybody looks at as a downside, really there's an upside there. So I'm an opportunity hunter. When they come in and they tell me they've got 5 employees that are a serious problem, or I got hired once by a big corporation because the advanced systems planning people weren't doing a good job. They were fighting all the time rather than being productive. And all I really did was change the order in which they talked. I assigned them all a number and said, you must speak in this order. And suddenly they became productive, because it wasn't what they were doing that was a problem, it was the order in which they were doing it. Instead of having a guy look for everything that's going wrong, wait till somebody comes up with the problem and then have him find solutions. That, to me, when I go into a business, they're always telling me how it's not working. And inside of that is the answer of how to make it work. Just like with clients. When a client comes in and tells me they have this big personal problem, typically the answer isn't what they're telling me. You know, they come in and they go, oh, you know, I've got, you know, I'm blowing everything out of proportion, and I'll go shrink it down. Well, with the business, when they're telling me that, you know, that part of the assembly line isn't working, right? And that they're having a lot of turnover of employees because the job is too boring. Sometimes just by having them sing a song all day long, that creates the rhythm that keeps that part of the assembly line working right, makes it so that everybody wants to work on that part of the assembly line because those people are having more fun. And, you know, sometimes it's just the silliest little thing that's being looked at the wrong way. Having a boring job where you just stick a cotta pin in an assembly line is boring because people aren't doing it to music. Because people do boring things to music all the time and call it fun. I believe that's called dancing.
That'd be cool. Okay, so one of the presuppositions of NLP is obviously there's no failure, there's only feedback.
Correct, and that's exactly my attitude when I go in. It's that what's not working that everybody's complaining about is not being taken as feedback so that you make it work. And so when I go in, I listen to what everybody says, and not as a judgment, but as information. And if I use the meta model, I'll get right to the source of what's creating the difficulty. And take that difficulty, flip it around, it becomes productivity. And that's, to me, that's what my job is to make everything more productive. Better, faster, quicker, more profit. Spend half the time and get 4 times as much money. That's the goal I have for every business I work with and every person that ever comes in. Like when you went into your mentorship program, that's where we started. I said, this is my goal for you. My goal is bigger than your goal. My goal is to get you to stop complaining and start being productive, because all the time you spend worrying, all the time you spend complaining is unproductive time. And if you could take that same amount of time and solve problems, you'll end up making 4 times as much money in half the time. And that's what we said about doing. And everything that we did in every session and every interaction was to get you to take your own business and look at it as an opportunity, not as a dysfunctional machine. It's only dysfunctional because of where you're punching the wrong buttons in the wrong order. And if you get the sequence right, then everything starts to hum.
Absolutely. It's funny how that's worked out 3 years later.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, you know, I remember years ago that was a guy that worked on cars. And the first time I went in, it was because my car was making some weird noise. And I pulled in and I said, I'm afraid there's something wrong with my car. And he looked at me and he said, yes. And I said, this is a repair shop. And he went, no. He looked at me and he said, if you want a repair shop, go someplace else. I optimize cars. He said, whatever little noise your car is making isn't telling me what's wrong with your car. It's telling me what your car needs. And if I listen to your car, I'll make it so it has twice as much horsepower, handles better than it did when it came out of the factory floor. And if we optimize your car, he said, you'll want to drive it for the rest of your life. And to me, that's a completely different attitude. And he learned everything about the model of the car that I had. And by the time he was done with it, it was a better car than when I bought it. And I had less trouble with it, and it was easier, you know. It was more expensive initially, but boy, I got news for you. Anytime anybody had anything going on with their car, I'd send them to this guy, and it came back a better car, you know. And, you know, the fact that the factory says certain tires are good doesn't mean they are. He would change the suspension a little bit, put different cars on it, the car would handle 5 times better than it did when I bought it. You know, he put a different manifold on it, it almost doubled the horsepower. And I got better gas mileage as well. It was just amazing, all the things, because he didn't look at a car and then wait till it was broken and go in and go, my job is to fix it. He'd go, the reason his car breaks is because it hasn't been optimized yet. If we optimize the car, then none of these problems will reoccur. And to me, when I go into a business or I work with an individual, my job is to optimize the use of their mind so that the problems solve themselves. And in fact, there's something outside of those problems that's even better. It's called productivity.
Great. So on that theme of failure and feedback, what would you consider to be a significant failure that you've made, and what did you learn from it?
Well, I'll tell you the biggest mistake I ever made was putting my lawyer and my accountant on my board of directors at the first corporation that I had. I was already paying them. I didn't need their advice. And what happened was, to me, just one of the weird things is I needed a room for a meeting because I was involved in holography and science, and somebody was flying in to an airport and they didn't have the time to drive all the way out to where I lived. So somebody I knew had a friend who was at GRT at the time, which was a record company, basically. They owned about 10% of the recording market. And the guy said he would loan us an office and a meeting room. And when I went in, I got there a little early and I met the guy who loaned us the office. And he was retiring. And he was a guy that was one of the guys that invented things like videotape, tape duplicating, the microwave oven. He was a scientist and he was a real interesting guy, but he had been running corporations for years, and they literally brought him in when these corporations got in the hole and he would fix them. And when I told him that, I was doing this with the company, he said, well, you should put me on your board of directors. And I said, why would you want to be on my board of directors? My company doesn't even do $1 million a year. GRT did like 300 million last year. And he said, you don't get it. Guys like me like what we do. We want to teach young people like you. I was in my 20s. He goes, we want to teach people like you how to do it correctly so you don't make mistakes. And he looked at me and he said, you probably have your accountant and your lawyer on your board of directors. And I went, you're right. And he goes, why? You're already paying them. Why would you want to give up part of the leadership of your company? And he said, I don't need to be paid. I got a lot of money. He goes, but I know how this is done. And I know all the things that you need to be advised about. That's what a board of directors is for. They're advisors that tell the CEO and the treasurer and the people that are running the company how to do it without making mistakes, because we've already made them years ago. And that's kind of the smartest advice that I got. That's one of those don't reinvent the wheel things that has stuck with me over the years. Part of the reason that I like the idea of recapitulating success is because of the advice of that guy. His name was Vin Carver, by the way. I don't believe he's alive anymore because he was a lot older than me. I'm now 70, and when I was 20, he was 70. So unless he's found the secret of eternal life, I don't believe Vin Carver's alive, but his advice will live with me forever.
Sounds good. So there's a question that's just popped up, and it's, I think, going back to some of your original work, when you were looking at people who'd overcome problems, phobias, or whatever, were there any consistent themes that you noticed in people who had overcome their problems and their challenges?
Well, yeah. One of the big ones is that people got fed up with it.
Yeah.
More than anything, there seems to be a numerical thing about how many times a problem occurs within a certain period of time. That, when women finally stop going back to the guy that beats the crap out of them, when people, after 20 years of having the same fear of heights, finally, have to tell their kid they can't go up to the edge of a building. And it happens, it seems like because what I started doing was taking people who weren't fed up and attaching the 5 biggest memories together and running them in a circle, all, within 5 or 10 minutes. And people would get really fed up and suddenly they disassociate and they look at themselves repeating this behavior and they start thinking, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. Whether they're 60, 50, 20, or 15 years old, when you start disassociating so that you see yourself making the same mistake and start feeling how much time this is going to take in the future. Because the real currency of living is how you spend your moments. Mm-hmm. And when we're inside of a fear, you don't think about it. You're just trying to get out of it. And when people are on an escalator and they're terrified, all they're thinking about is getting off the escalator. But when you walk up to the escalator and you're terrified and you start thinking, I got a kid who was just born. couple of years from now, he's going to be standing next to me. You start looking at yourself from the outside and realizing how, you know, even though you've been doing this, I had a guy who was terrified of escalators, who was a race car driver. Much more dangerous to drive a race car than to ride up an escalator. So it's not like it makes sense. But at the moment I brought him over to the escalator, there was in LA, there were 4 stories of escalator right in a row in the Beverly Plaza. And I took him to the bottom, and he was literally, his knees were shaking and giving out. And I said to him, I said, I want you to think of bringing your kid here, and your kid's going to stand here and see you be this scared. I said, how do you feel as you think about yourself here with your kid? You have to look at it from the outside. You can't look at that from the inside. And he said, well, he said, it's just embarrassing. He said, it's going to be horrible. I said, so what are you going to do? Avoid any building with an escalator until your kid's 30? And he went, that would be stupid, because it's not until you feel that stupid behaviors are stupid that you stop doing them. And it's not a bad thing to feel stupid, because that's the moment where you get smarter. And I said, now, if you look at yourself being terrified, right, and you run this movie in your head with your kid there, I said, how do you feel as you're watching this? And he says to me, he goes, I don't want that. And I said, yeah. And I said, except you're standing here feeling like you don't want that, and you're looking at an escalator. How scared do you feel now? Because the truth is when you're looking at yourself suffering, if you're afraid of roller coasters and you see yourself in a roller coaster going around, and you think to yourself, you know, I don't want to be that person, you're still looking at a roller coaster, only you're feeling something different. Mm-hmm. Because once we disassociate from what we were doing, then you can take the memories and run them forward and run them backwards. You can do all kinds of things that affect your neurology, so you don't have that thing. You clear the pathway, so to speak, and then start to imagine yourself doing things successfully. And that's the big secret to almost everything. You create a void and then fill it, and you train the neurology to have a new response. Virginia Satir, literally the first time I ever saw her work, we were driving back, it was a 4-hour drive. And she said, do you know why people make bad choices? I said, I have no idea. And she said, because they don't have one. She said, they can't help themselves because they only have one way to feel. And when you run a memory backwards from the inside, it flattens out the neurons, so they don't run automatically. You still have to imagine yourself doing something successful so that you can imagine feeling this way and imagine feeling this way. And if people have a choice where it could go neurologically up and go to one of 2 ways, typically they'll pick the best one.
That's great. Another question came in. If you were setting up a business now, say because you'd lost your job as a result of COVID, would you focus on a particular niche? So say, for example, being an NLP coach, or would you go for several niches and try and spread the business out? So being an NLP coach, NLP trainer.
I lost my job.
Well,
I've actually lost my job, so I don't have to imagine it. Most of what I'm doing this year has been canceled, but luckily I'm 70 and I've saved a little money, so I can afford that. But to me, the thing is I wouldn't like decide I'm just going to be a coach or I'm just going to be this. To me, I would be asking the question, what can I do to make money in the short run? What can I make money in the long run? How can I design all of this so that when I'm getting down the road and the world opens up, I end up with a much bigger piece of every pie. You know, when I was young, I played music and worked in a computer lab and were in groups at night. You know, I did everything I could to make income so that I took my time and divided it up, but kept my eye on the prize, which is that if I ultimately started a business that did training, I would be better off. And, you know, and it worked out for me. Given the crisis comes, some people have discovered that they were too dependent on their job. And I always think you need a little backup. You know, it's like a lot of people don't save enough money. I don't care how old you are, but the younger you are, the more you should be training yourself to put away 10 to 15% of whatever you make, so that if the coronavirus or something else happens, you'll have a little bit of capital. And you know, otherwise you have to borrow capital and you give up part of your equity. It's just common sense. But building up slowly and finding out, I would find out, because if you're going to start a coaching business, you're going to have get customers. And there's always a customer acquisition cost of some kind. And as you get some customers, then you can look at that and begin to figure out what else you can do. I don't think it's an either-or situation. I would try everything and find out what works. Start dancing between things. You know, oddly enough, here's a good example. Older gentleman lost his job here in state I live in, and nobody could go outside. And woman across the street said to him, she said, you know, I can't have male friends over. I have no one to teach my son how to do anything. She said, I used to get my boyfriends to teach him how to fix things. And she goes, and he's, you know, he doesn't even know how to tie a tie. So this guy set up a little website, and it's called Ask Dad or something. And he, you know, the first one he did was a little video about how you put a new stopper in your toilet, you know, the stopper things that always break in the toilets. And then he did one about fixing sinks and one about how to tie a Windsor knot, and one by one started adding these things. He's now got over 1 million people that go to his website, you know, and they're now filing requests. And he said, you know, it's on the news today. And he said, I've got more requests than I could possibly fill myself. I'm going to have to start hiring other people. And so, you know, there's the possibility of doing something on YouTube, and there's Facebook, and there's all these different mediums by which you can draw people towards you so that you can do coaching, so you can do consulting. And by the way, especially at this time, there is no shortage of people who are, well, for lack of a better term, in need of good advice. We're not going to run out of crazy people or crazy ideas. And certainly when it comes to fear and being able to control fear, there are people that are just terrified to go out of their house and terrified to do everything. Even when they opened up here, the state of Texas, you go in the supermarket, there are some people, boy, they just, you know, they're like 12 feet apart. And if you get within 12 feet of them, they start freaking out like, you know, the virus is going to fly across and kill them. You know, the media has focused so much on the negative aspects of everything about this. And by the way, between you and me, I don't trust their numbers, you know, because every hospital that codes anything, as in the United States at least, as being virus related, they automatically get $55,000, right? But if you actually died of a heart attack, then it has to go through the insurance companies, and they may or may not get paid. So anybody who walks in a hospital, you cough, you got coronavirus. And anybody who died of coronavirus. And the fact that there are new cases is because we're testing more people. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. So I'm a little suspicious of it. And to me, I think they overreacted. That may be a good thing. Certainly taught people to be a little more clean. They're cleaning our airplanes. They're cleaning our schools. They should have been doing that all along, but it's going to be a little bit more sanitary world, but there's going to be a lot of people that are terrified. And it's blown a lot of people's fears out of proportion. So there's a lot of work out there, you know. Are you afraid to touch a shopping cart? You know, I mean, I carry sanitary things in the door panel of my car and wipe shopping carts off, but I've been doing that for 5-10 years. Just in general, I you know, anytime I go a place where everybody's touching everything, I'm a little hesitant about it.
You're ahead of the game.
Most people don't wash their hands. We end up with a planet where more people wash their hands. That's a good thing. But if they're afraid to shake hands with anybody ever again, that's a bad thing. To me, people have to learn to base their fear on something they can see and hear, not on what they hear on the news. And helping people to overcome their trepidations, their fears, and trying to do things should be a very lucrative business these days. you could set up a stand on the corner and find out who won't walk up to it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And sadly, I mean, I've seen a massive increase in the amount of people who want help with fear and anxiety in the last 2 months. It's been scary, ironically. But yeah, I think there is a huge need out there for it.
Well, it will help all us neurolinguistic programmers to build a good, solid economic foundation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been great. Okay. There was a question popped up before, more of a request actually. Would you mind telling the yogurt story and how it applies to business?
The what story?
Yogurt goes to yogurt, or yogurt knows yogurt. Yogurt.
Oh, well, that's not a story. That's an experiment.
An experiment, yeah.
You know, they took a yogurt culture and measured its electrical activity when they fed it milk. And when they divided the culture itself in half, they fed half of it milk and the other half went wild. It knew the other half was being fed. No matter how far they moved it apart, it still seemed to know. In fact, they put lead walls in between it. They tried everything, but yogurt knows yogurt. And the truth that I get from this is that when you take something as primitive as yogurt, and it can know what's going on because something is so much like it, that it makes it important for us to realize that our attitude, that when you take people and you put them in the same room and one starts yawning, pretty soon they're all yawning. And if you put people in a room and have them start complaining, if you put them in a crowd and have them start chanting Black Lives Matter and being angry, then pretty soon everybody's going to get angry. That yogurt knows yogurt, people know people, and anger knows anger. And to me, I think the best way to combat that is by all of us going into the right state. When you walk into your business, if you're optimistic and you're upbeat and you're enthusiastic and you're motivated, it's going to reverberate through the people around you. When I saw successful businessmen, even in small businesses with 30 or 40 employees, there was always an entrepreneur who is like a beam of light. And as he would come through, everybody in the place would light up and work harder. And I think all of us who run businesses should decide to be that beam of light and to keep vibrating. And the more people we get to vibrate, the more the world will vibrate. And hopefully we'll get together and vibrate closer together. But distance is not the thing. It's not the fact that we're in separate houses. It's that more of us are looking at the future optimistically. And the prophets of doom have been around since the beginning of time, telling us the world is going to end. The world was supposed to end in 2012. It was supposed to end, Mary Baker Eddy said it was going to end in 1937. And all the Seventh-day Adventists sold everything they had and climbed up to the top of the mountain, and the world didn't end. And whenever I hear cranky, depressive, pessimistic people, I always go, they're not looking at history. The world has gotten better since the beginning of time. There are more people now with warm, full, and dry than there ever has been. Perhaps even too many of them. Eventually, we will go to the stars because we know they're there. The only question is, what's going to get in the way? What's going to get in the way is the attitude of people. You adjust your attitude and the attitude of the people around you changes. This is why I teach and have taught for 50 years. Try and get more people to vibrate. Because ultimately, I want my yogurt to know more yogurt.
That's really, I mean, it is really powerful. And we see this all the time in the seminars, the energy that kind of dissipates to the room and the magic that you work with it. And connected with that, I think it's possibly a bit of a cheeky question, but when you're tapping your foot on the floor, is that a conscious or a subconscious thing when you're on stage in the seminars?
Yeah, I'm just hearing music in my head and tapping to it. Just keeps my rhythm even. A lot of people worry about my foot. I have more important things to think about.
I'm sure you do. There's a question that's popped up here, which I think is quite interesting. It says, I have a friend who won't eat in public and wants to change that behavior. What would you do with them?
Well, how public is public? Where's the line? I mean, will they eat with people at their house?
It doesn't say any more than that. So,
well, again, the devil is in the details. See, even a height phobia has to start somewhere. You know, if you take a height phobia, is it 1 step up, 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps? Where do they start being afraid that they're too high up? And if they can't eat in public, right, they've got to have some kind of an idea that tells them when they're in public. Is it outside it? Does it have to do with location? You know, or does it have to do, because could they go into an empty restaurant and eat? I mean, there's all kinds of details that will tell us what it is that they're thinking that's making it so they can't. Mm-hmm. Because obviously they have some kind of fear that blocks them from being able to do it. Mm-hmm. And the question is, what starts it? Mm-hmm. Because if you don't change the way they think, they will continue to do the same thing for the rest of their life. And, you know, whatever this fear is based on that prevents them from putting food in their mouth in what they consider to be public. I don't know if that's a football game or a Taco Bell or the backyard. Once we know where the line is, then we can find out what's creating the line, and that's how you change it. Mm-hmm. Because change the way you think, it will change the way you feel, and therefore it will change what you're capable of doing. They will be capable of eating in public when they change the way they think about it. And whatever they're thinking, it's not what's, you know, when I eat in public, typically I'm thinking about my food. Now, I've looked at food in public and decided not to eat it because it didn't smell good. But if I like the food I'm eating, I don't give a crap who's around. But you're best not touching my plate because I'll fork you.
Yep, I'd take that advice on board. Yes, it's just popular. Andrea said that she won't eat in restaurants, but she won't eat at home, this person. So I guess
she will eat at home with other people there.
Yeah, but won't eat in restaurants. Is it comfortable with the
front yard with somebody if there was a table there?
So she's only comfortable with close family seeing her eating. I'm guessing that would include.
Pardon?
The comments say that she's only comfortable with close family seeing her eating.
So she doesn't like eating with strangers.
Possibly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, or with family with strangers watching. Mm-hmm. Okay, and when you say she's not comfortable, what exactly does that mean?
It doesn't say. It doesn't give us enough detail.
It's so uncomfortable she won't do it. So it's apparently a big bad feeling. What do you have to think to make that feeling? What would I have to think if I went into a restaurant to feel the way she did? That's what I would have to know. If I know how she does it, I can tell her how not to. But I can't guess through the internet.
Well, this is always going to be a challenge, isn't it?
This is why you got to learn the meta model and apply it.
That sounds really good. So I'm just, Rich, I'm conscious of the fact we're coming up to nearly 2 hours, and it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you. I guess if there was one final piece of advice that you want to give to people in terms of using NLP in business, what would it be?
Well, I would say make bigger pictures of how you're going to be successful. Get those pictures off in the distance, make them the size of giant movie screens so you can put lots of detail in them, and then kind of build a set that comes back to where you are. Because if you're doing well now, you should be able to figure out that you're going to be doing 4 times as well in a year. And even though you don't know how you're going to do it, just see it happening. Nikola Tesla used to go in his mind into environments and where he would do things that had never been done. He imagined electromagnetic motors, lighting up generator. He imagined a generator lighting up a city, and literally went in and tore it apart piece by piece, measured the pieces, and built one in the world that worked. Your ability to imagine things that are not happening yet is what your imagination is for. One time there were no houses, now they're everywhere. There were no cars, now they're everywhere. There were no airplanes, people imagined them and then they built them. Reality is built from imagination. Your business can be ever so much more successful. You need the imagination to see that it can be that way, and then to re-engineer and reverse to figure out how to get there. Believe in yourself and believe in the future, because I'll tell you, the best thing about the past is that it's over, and the best thing about the future is that it can be whatever we imagine and do.
That's brilliant. And I still remember when you gave me all that advice when we were doing the mentorship, and it's kind of stuck with me, and it has had a huge impact on my business. So I can't thank you enough personally, for the stuff you've done for me. And I'm sure there's thousands of people out there that would echo that, and also the people who've joined the webinar tonight. So I just want to say a huge thank you for your time and for the wisdom you shared with us. It's been absolutely brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, obviously the video will be available. We'll get that uploaded in the next 24, 48 hours. And Richard, thank you ever so much. It's been absolutely brilliant. And I don't know if you can see the comments coming in. Everybody's absolutely loving it. So thank you, Murray.
Tell that woman to get together with a good neuro-linguistic programmer, and next thing you know, she'll be eating in restaurants. And
brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gents. I will speak to you all soon. Catch you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.